Well, Mr. Birthday Man, I don't think he needs any a long introduction anymore because we know him well. Please, welcome to our pulpit, Rabbi Lennick.
My goodness, thank you so much. So today is my 69th birthday, and I felt like I had to do an inventory. And I decided today that reflecting on my own life, I wanted to tell you 3 stories that truly have shaped my spiritual experience of this world. They're true and personal. And I'll start by saying, in the world around us that feels and is so exceedingly chaotic right now, it's good to take an inventory of our inner world and to see where we stand with ourselves. Because when we stand outside, we have a phrase in Yiddish, oi gewalt, oi for the world. What are we going to do? So a little background. I was raised by awesome women. My mother, Bertie, my grandmother, Shirley, and they gave me a wonderful life because on the day I was born, my father abandoned our... Not a good sign. So I was about to say my father abandoned our family. That was a universal affirmation, but that was definitely not a good thing. But I was very influenced by my great-grandfather, Louis Wolfe, who came to this country in the late 1890s from Lithuania, actually not far from the capital near Vilnius. And he was a proud and observant Jew. And every morning and every evening, he would go to the synagogue and pray, as is the custom of traditional Jews, even here when he got to the United States in the 1890s. All the Jewish holidays were celebrated at his house with food and singing and rituals. And when I was 5 years old, he took me to his synagogue on a very festive holiday, and he put me up on his shoulders, and I saw all these people dancing and singing and carrying Torah scrolls around the synagogue, and something struck my heart right then and there. And then he said to me, Bobby, that's what they used to call me, do you see that man sitting over there with the fancy hat? That's the rabbi. He's the wisest person in town. And then he said, Bobby, you're a very smart boy. Maybe someday you'll be a rabbi. And that stuck with me. Well, my great-grandfather was also an avid gardener. And in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts, where he lived, he planted a garden every year with vegetables and spices and his pride tomatoes. And he always would fertilize those tomatoes with fish heads. How did he get the fish heads? Well, I was there, and here's what I observed. When I was 6 years old, he took me to Haymarket Square in Boston with the open-air market and the wholesalers. They would sell fish and meat, poultry, and vegetables. And on that day, my great-grandfather Louis was on a quest for fish. Why? Because it was the day before Passover, and his wife, my Nana Jean, was going to make gefilte fish. Now, gefilte fish is not a species of fish, in case you didn't know. Gefilte fish is made from any kind of white fish. It's ground up and it's boiled into these beautiful little fish cakes. And you eat it with horseradish, ground horseradish, grated horseradish, and beets, grated beets. And it's an old world favorite. Jews still eat it all the time. A lot of people who eat it the first time go, oh my God, it is the most awful thing. And so the day before Passover, my grandfather went to Haymarket Square and he took me to the fish man. And he got 6 very large carp out of a barrel. They were alive. And the man put them in a big plastic bag with water. We drove back to my great-grandfather's house. My great-grandmother had already set up the grinder in the kitchen. And when we got back, the bathtub was already filled with water, and my great-grandfather would put the fish in the bathtub, and I'm thinking, there's fish swimming in the bathtub. And then at the appointed moment, my Nana Jean would say, time for the fish. And my great-grandfather, you could see the anticipation, almost like this homicidal desire to kill the fish, because he would get the heads, and he would take the fish and whack it, cut the head off. He would take the heads, she would take the fish. We had 6 of these fish heads. He grabbed my hand, took me out the back door to his garden. He got down on his knees. Remember, he grew up in a farming village, so he loved his hands in the dirt. And he's like digging and digging and digging and putting the fish in the ground. And he looks up to me with, you have to imagine, with a European accent. He says, "This is my secret weapon." After burying the fish heads, we went back in the house to wash up. And when he washed up, he had a ring on his finger. And he took the ring off to wash it up too. It turned out it was his Masonic ring. He was a Freemason and the worshipful master of his lodge. So the years went by and he continued to do the fish heads, and I slowly grew up, and I was fortunate he lived till I was 15 years old. The year before he died, he had become much more frail, hands much more thin, and he went to bury the fish heads that last time in 1971 before Passover, and he put his hands in the ground and he lost the ring. It fell off of his finger. And he would never tell anybody. If people would say, "Louis, where's your ring?" He'd say, "Oh, my fingers are too thin now. I put it away." But in fact, it had been lost. The following fall, Grandpa passed away. And the following spring, Nana Jean still living in their house. The garden had been fallow. But you know, there were leftover tomatoes in the ground, and they took root. And before you knew it, when spring began, the little tomato plants started to grow up out of the fallow ground. And about 6 weeks into the springtime, one of the plants came up, and the ring was on one of the plants. True story. The ring came up almost embraced by the beautiful baby leaves of the tomato plant. And when I was 18, it was given to me. And this is it. You know, that story impacted me very seriously when I was young, because it felt so miraculous that the lost ring would come up out of the ground. And I had to ask, what could make something like that happen? And the answer was, I'll never know, but it's something. And that was the first big spiritual lesson for me, that what is most spiritual are the things that are most mysterious, that we just experience and take them for what they are. Don't judge it, just embrace it. And every day I wear this ring, it reminds me of my grandfather's humility, great-grandfather's humility, and of his faith. So that's the first story, the story of the ring. The second story is the story of the wall. My great-grandfather also told me a lot about Israel, and he talked a lot about the Wailing Wall in Israel, now called the Western Wall, was called the Kotel back in nowadays in Hebrew. And Jews have yearned to go there through the centuries. They would want to return to Jerusalem, and because it was denied them for so many years. And my great-grandfather said, but don't forget, any Jew who goes to the Wailing Wall, they will cry from their soul. They will cry from their soul. So when I was 17 years old, I made my first trip to Israel, and I happened to have been international president of United Synagogue Youth, which is the largest Jewish teenage organization in the world, or at least it was back then. And I go to Israel on a 6-week trip, and we get off the plane at Ben Gurion Airport, we kiss the tarmac, we get on a bus, and like everyone else, go right to the Kotel, right to the Western Wall. And as we're going up the mountain to Jerusalem, I'm thinking, every Jewish soul cries at the Kotel. Every Jewish soul cries at the Kotel. And we arrive at the Kotel, and I walk up to the Kotel, and I'm standing there. I put my nose right against the stone. I put my hands up on the rock. I see all the little notes stuck into the crevices, and I sit there, and I'm like ready to cry, and nothing happens. I'm thinking, it's just a wall. I took it for what it was. I knew I would come back through the summer. I went back there 12 times during the summer. And every time with the greatest anticipation, with my grandfather's voice in my head, every Jewish soul cries at the Kotel. And every time I went, I would pray. I put a note in the wall. I'd hear the singing, look at all the dancing. I could feel the connectivity of Jews from around the world, but I didn't cry. And being a teenager, boy, did that promote a lot of teenage angst in me. I thought, oh my God, I must be a damaged Jew. Oh my God, I'm international president of USY, and it's like, I'm a fake. I must be a fake. It wore on me that whole 6 weeks I was in Israel. And the last night, before we left, we go to the wall before going to the airport. And I go up to the wall one last time. I'm taking such a deep breath, like, I'm going to cry this time. It's like I'm praying to cry. I mean, how strange is that? I'm praying to cry. I go up to the wall, the same thing happens. It doesn't happen. And we walk away. And I'm thinking, the hardest part of this, I can't even tell anybody about this, you know? Just at the last moment before I was away from the wall, the last view of it, I looked back and I saw something I had not seen before because I hadn't the vision to see it till that moment. And I noticed in that wall, growing out of the stone, are these beautiful bushes with the most gorgeous pink and white flowers growing out of the rock. Literally out of the rock. These stones are 3,000 years old from the time of King Solomon. And you know, there's a belief that that wall was a retaining wall for a platform, and the ancient temples were built on top of that. And there's a legend that says behind that very wall, the 10 Commandments, the original 10 Commandments are hidden somewhere in some place where the temple, underneath where the temple used to stand. And that's why people would put the notes in, because they felt the notes would get them as close to God as you could possibly get. And then I looked at those bushes with the flowers, and I thought to myself, that's the story of the Jewish people. That no matter what we've been through, genocide, mass murder, expulsions, anything that history has brought to us, we have had the tenacity to continue to survive like flowers growing out of a rock. And I thought of all the people that had given their lives to defend us or whose lives had been taken. And I thought about all the Jewish people had given to the world. And then the floodgate opened. And I really did cry. But they were tears of relief. And they were tears that finally had come to me. Some of the other kids in that group came over to me and said, well, what's going on? Why are you crying? And I told a fib. I said, well, I was standing up at the wall and I had this image that my great-grandfather Louis, who had died 3 years ago, was standing there next to me. And then I thought to myself, he most certainly was. That's the second story. The third story is a traumatic story. When I was a rabbi in Greenwich, Connecticut, for a number of years, there was a murder-suicide of 2 teenage boys who were both furious and angry at both sets of parents who were going through ugly divorces. And rather than get into the gory details, they went into the woods and there was a murder-suicide. One of the boys was the son of a member of my synagogue. The son was raised half Jewish and half Catholic. The mother was Catholic. And they were in the midst of a very, very horrible divorce. Well, as soon as the word got out of this terrible tragedy, the husband, soon-to-be ex-husband and soon-to-be ex-wife, went to war with each other about the funeral. The mother saying it will be a Catholic funeral, and the father saying it will be a Jewish funeral. And of course, the priest and I were friends, and our view was, why can't we do a little of both? They couldn't agree, so it landed in front of a judge. We all had to go to court, the priest, the rabbi, the parents, and after hearing everybody's perspective, and of course the priest and I are thinking, we've never seen anything like this in our entire lives. The judge decided the funeral would be at the synagogue with the priest in attendance, and the burial would be at the Catholic cemetery with the rabbi in attendance. That was the decree, and that's what was done. We had the funeral at the synagogue a day later, and of course it was somber. It was a place filled with loathing and guilt and such sadness comparatively to very little I'd ever witnessed. And then we went to the cemetery. And the priest got up to begin the service, and all of a sudden the father speaks up and says, I want a Jewish star on my son's casket, especially if he's going to be buried here in a Catholic cemetery. The brother of the mother responded, are you kidding me? You had your time. This is our turn. This is our service. How dare you demand that from us? At which point these two men got into a fight, literally into a fight. And during the fight, one of them slipped into the grave. We pulled him out. The priest was sitting there going, and I finally spoke up and I said, do you see what's happening here? How can you behave this way? You're standing over the grave of this young boy. Are you so self-involved you can't think of anything else? I can tell you, the good father, the priest and I, in our entire careers, have never witnessed such degradation and disrespect as what's just gone on right here. So you got to knock it off. And the father said, I just want a star for my son's casket. So then something came to me, bizarre as it was. This was before the age of cell phones, so I couldn't call the funeral home. And the hearse, and they had left already. Down a small hill, there was a garage. For the cemetery, I figured maybe they have a phone. I said, if you all can behave yourselves for 5 minutes, I'll go down the hill, I'll call the funeral home, they're only 5 minutes away, they'll bring a star. Can we agree on that? And they did. I walked down the hill, I had my black robe on with my Jewish stars, and I walked into the garage, and there were 3 guys sitting there, grave diggers, playing poker. And I said, we have a problem, the hill. I'm trying to find a Jewish star. Do you have a telephone? No, we don't have a telephone. The guy in charge said, just a minute. He walked to the back of the garage, came back a minute later, and he had two wooden Jewish stars in his hand. He said, you know, I've been working here for 25 years, but a week ago, we had a burial of a Jewish husband. And at the last minute, they decided not to use the stars. So the gravedigger from New York gave them to me. Will this help you? And the two other gravediggers were sitting there going, like, I could hear it. And then one of them said to me, well, maybe God knew you were going to be here today. Gave me the stars, and here I am taking the star, you know, walking up the hill. And they're all sitting there completely awed, as I was. We placed the star on the coffin. The priest did the funeral, and it all came to an end. But I still have the second star. This is the second of the two from that day. And when my time comes, this is going to go on my coffin. Happy Sunday.